Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for hitting that play button. This is another episode of the Dave Bullis Podcast. Before we get to today's episode, I just want to mention Game Over is now live. This is the project I've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast. I know some of you probably thought it wasn't even real, but I actually finally decided to release it after the past few years for a couple of reasons. So if you're interested, if you're even curious, if you just want to watch it just to see what I've been talking about for these past couple of years, it's now up. And this was a project, again, that I shot back in 2010, 2011. It was a TV pilot. We ended up pitching it to a few networks, namely G4. And G4, the execs we pitched it to, actually said to us, this is exactly what we're looking for. But we're actually going out of business and becoming the GQ network. So just bad timing. There were so many stories from coming out of this, from this project, and there's so many things I learned that I just doing actual big budget stuff, and I know big budget obviously is relative, but what I mean by that is actually having a budget, actually having a strict schedule, actually building a set, actually shooting on a real life studio. I mean, right after us, After Earth with M. Night Shyamalan came in there. So if you want to see this TV pilot, it's up on YouTube right now. There's also a detailed blog to go along with it, and it's on my website at davebullis.com. Also, don't forget, I'm going to be a guest on an episode of Alex Ferrari's podcast, which is the #1 filmmaking podcast, the Indie Film Hustle. Next week, talking all about Game Over. The episode is going to be titled "How to Make a TV Pilot and Fail." After Game Over after I got done completing Game Over, I actually got approached to do a couple other things, TV pilot-wise. And, I've learned so much about doing those as well. And also, the other projects that I did after that, people wonder, where are those projects at? Well, in the blog post, I talk about that. So I won't bore it with you right now. Some are live, some aren't. So if you're curious at all about Game Over, about my half-hour TV pilot, about 5 employees at a video game store trying to get to the next level of their lives, it's a comedy. I'm sure you'll find something of value in it. Please give it a watch. I'm hoping that this can cause a little buzz, that it can build a little momentum for me as I go into my next project. I just, one other quick thing. I just want to mention something to all you filmmakers out there. Maybe if you're not even a filmmaker and you're listening to this because you're just like Dave and you want to hear us talk about NWA Wrestling, let me just give you a little tip. Confidence is one of those weirdest things in life. It's very, very hard to get and very easy to lose, and that's what happened to me. So I'll leave you with that little tidbit of advice. So having said all that, in this episode, I chat with a man who is a writer in Hollywood, and how we discuss how he segued into professional wrestling, where he wrote for WWE, Ring of Honor, TNA, and he now works with Billy Corgan in NWA Wrestling, National Wrestling Alliance. And we also talk about content creation and how you get that out there. And I also give him my opinion about how they could actually beat WWE, which would be pretty cool if they actually did. This is episode 186 with guest Dave Lagana.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Actually, I started with my parents. They did a lot of the heavy lifting to get me here, physically and obviously emotionally. But as far as my Hollywood journey, and actually we were talking about this the other day, my very first venture into Hollywood was a trip when I was like 12 or 13 years old. I was a freshman in high school, and we took this ridiculous trip to California that was like 21 days. It was like before my freshman year of high school. And I remember going out to dinner with my dad the first night, and we spent $100 on dinner. And this was like 1989. So my dad was going, we can't spend $100 a meal. It'll be $2,100. And, I remember that just because it was so fitting at the time. But we went on like this cruise, and then we went and saw like a taping of the Pat Sajak show. And then we went to see a taping of Family Matters. Do you remember the Family Matters show with the Urkel?
Oh, I remember Family Matters.
Yeah. So this was at the Sony lot, which is still there, and ended up working on this lot many years later, actually almost 11 years later on a sitcom. But the security guard screwed up. And instead of having us sort of wait over on this sort of area to wait to go on the thing, he just let us wander the back lot. And yes, Tommy Dreamer, you're an Urkel. Tommy Dreamer's watching this. So we wandered the back lot that entire day, and they were shooting the movie Hook at the time. Steven Spielberg directed it. Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman and who's the chick in Pretty Woman? I am blanking.
Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts was there, and at the time she had just left somebody and was with Kiefer Sutherland, was with Kiefer Sutherland and left for Jason Patric of Speed 2 fame. Yeah, I'm name dropping a lot of really weird names at this point, very early on, and we'll get to the point here in a moment. And it was just the craziest thing. I was 13, and I'm like, this is pretty dang cool. And they were. Just remember walking by Robin Williams, and he was just cutting cutting jokes in front of the crew, and it was just like, this seems like something I'd really, really, really like to do. And so, fast forward, and I kind of found my way into a college named Emerson College, which has produced a lot of very strong comedians like Dennis Leary and Jay Leno, and the crop of guys that I went to college with have all worked out really well, like Maria Menounos, who everyone knows from E! And various other things, and Seth Grahame-Smith, who wrote the Lego Batman movie, and he was a producer on It that just came out and done a lot of really good stuff, and just various other. My writing partner in college, a man by the name of Terry Metalis, created the 12 Monkeys TV show. Like, a lot of my college friends have gone on to do really amazing stuff, and it was a really great college that kind of got me ready to do a lot of production and writing and stuff. So. But also at the same time, I was a huge wrestling fan. I've been a wrestling fan since 1985. I used to go see the NWA in Philadelphia, see Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and the Road Warriors and the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette and Paul Ellering and all this stuff in 1985, and all that stuff. And it was an experience. And so when I got the chance to go to Hollywood, I interned at Young and the Restless. And I had also worked at NBC in their primetime series department. So I had all this really cool experience, but I still loved wrestling. And, I used to go to ECW shows my summers between college. And I was actually at the ECW show where Shane Douglas threw the NWA world title down. I think it was like August of 1994, and what made Eastern Championship Wrestling into Extreme Championship Wrestling. And, I was kind of hooked, and that's where I saw Tommy Dreamer for the first time, and, stuff like that. And so for me, it's a long-winded answer to get to Hollywood. Like, I had become friends with some of the ECW guys when I left college, and I decided to go chase the Hollywood dream in summer of 1997 instead of chasing the wrestling dream. But it only took 3 years or 4 years to get back into the wrestling dream.
So what? Before we continue, by the way, Dave, I wanted to mention one quick thing. I actually met Tommy Dreamer years and years ago, back when it was Eastern Championship Wrestling. And remember when Tommy had the suspenders? He didn't have the shirt or the pants. He wore those like suspender type deal. Yep. I met him when he like first debuted as a kid. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old.
Did you go to the shows in Philadelphia?
All the time.
Suspender Tommy is, Tommy's been a babyface, I think, his whole career. I know there's probably pockets of heel Tommy out there, and I'm sure some people will think Tommy's a heel, but I don't think Tommy Dreamer's a heel. He's a babyface to me. But Tommy's obviously somebody that I always enjoy, and I'm sure I'll get a text message here in a moment saying you're a babyface. So, but anyway, Tommy's a good friend, and he's a good friend of the boys, and he's always there if you need anything. So. I enjoy Tommy Dreamer. Yeah,
great guy when I met him, by the way. And but I just because he said he was watching, so I just wanted to say hi. So just to sort of go back to, we're talking about Hollywood and everything. How do you go about being able to even write an episode of Friends? Because I mean that was a mega show. I actually knew a guy who wrote an episode of Seinfeld, and he told the story of what he had to go through. And I mean, those were on par with each other. So, what was it like, Dave, to have to actually, I'm sure you had to pitch, and I'm sure there was a lot of legwork to even get that opportunity to write an episode.
Well, and I was super young I'm not that I'm super old now, but at times I feel it. And if you're watching on Periscope, you can see the gray in my beard. I was 24 when I got the opportunity to go on the writing team, and I was discussing this the other day as far as how that opportunity happened. And I don't know if you remember the story of the woman who sued the Friends writing staff because they used to speak very vilely in the writers' room. It was a pretty famous case. It went public, I think, in 2005 or 2006 after the show had finished. Well, that girl got fired because she was actually a pretty terrible writer's assistant. And at the time that I got hired because I could type fast. Seriously, like it's funny that I was not hired on skill beyond just I had an interview and they wanted to make sure I could put words together and fit with the culture, but I was hired because I could type fast. And you kind of have to take those entry doors into the business when you can get it. So I joined the staff in September of 1999, and it was a literally throw you in the deep end of the pool comedy writing. And I was in the writer's room every day for 5 to 7 hours, listening to probably the funniest people in the world come up with a show that to this day people still watch, and I still get tweets, and I still get a little green envelope once a month with residuals. And so, you learn very fast, and you watch people come up with jokes and story pitches very quickly. And at the time when my episode came out, they basically gave all of the writers' assistants an episode every year, for all the hours we put in. I mean, my first day at Friends, I went into work at 9:30 a.m. and I left the office at 6:15 a.m. the next day. So it was a culture shock. And I always used to remember calling my mom at about 3:45 or 4 o'clock in the morning while we had finished the draft, and I was sitting with our PA as they made copies to bring to executives' houses, because this wasn't pre-internet, but this was pre-sending files over the internet in like 99 2000. I remember calling my mom, who lived in Philadelphia at the time, and it was 6:45 or 7 o'clock in the morning. She's like, "Are you still at work?" I'm like, "Yep." So, and that's the glamour of the business that people don't see. They're like, "Oh, you were a writer. Oh, must have been great to know the staff." Yeah. When you're trying to beat a joke at 2:45 in the morning and you've been up for however long, you have to be back at 10 o'clock the next day. It was definitely a hard job, but obviously they've all gone on to do a lot of really great things, and the show's legacy still stands. But as far as how do you get an episode, you got to be in the right place at the right time. And this is where connections and having the right attitude and being ready for anything pays out. Like, nobody emailing 100 people 100 times a day won't get things done for you. You have to get out there. You got to make content, make stuff. And again, this was 1999, 2000. There was no YouTube. There was no independent productions. Like, you just had to be lucky. And I was super lucky. Like thank my lucky stars. There's this woman, Marlene Begg, that I will thank till the end of time, that made that opportunity happen for me. And she didn't know me from anybody. She just worked with me for like a week and said, "Oh, I have a friend over at Friends if you're looking to do that." I'm like, yeah. So, you just take the opportunities when you come. So that was that was how it came about. And, I spent one season there. Ultimately, I did not fit with the new showrunner that was coming in the next year. And again, I was very young and I wasn't really ready and understood sort of the politics of the room. And I was able to find another job with a really great showrunner who I learned a lot from, this man by the name of Vic Levin, who ran Mad About You for years and worked on a couple shows with him. And I learned so much about work ethic, and he was like one of the best bosses I ever had, because he lived and died. Like, usually at Friends, we'd finish the script at 2 o'clock. The writers would leave and leave me and another writer's assistant alone to get the script finished. When I worked for Vic Levin, he would literally sit there until it was copied and in the envelope, because he was that focused on making sure that there was no mistakes. And, ultimately I spent that extra time with him to learn more from him. And he was just great that way. And it's crazy to think here it was almost 16 years later, and I still remember exactly the hard work he put in with us at the time. And, he was a great mentor.
So, because I imagine the same skills translate over from Friends to wrestling, because when you have to write something very, very quickly and on the fly, you have to be able, you can't really, so to speak, you can't really sit around and be like, well, what if, how about this, blah, blah, blah. You have to sort of bang that out as quick as possible, right?
Of course. And, here's the difference between writing for Friends or any television show that, again, in that old model, and that model has changed a lot in the last 15 to 16 years, and writing for a traditional wrestling show that is live. If I were to give Bobby Lashley a line last year on a live show, like if it would come to my head at 7:59, he walks out at 8:02, I could say, what if you say this? He says it and it appears on television 2 minutes later. That is a crazy power, and also, it's scary to get that amount of instant feedback. On a sitcom, you could write a joke, an audience will laugh or not laugh, and you get a chance to basically beat that joke on a sitcom. So it was always interesting to me to have that sort of backup on sitcoms as far as what we would do, but on a wrestling show, it's one take. You know what I mean? And so the skill obviously helped sort of as we move forward in wrestling, but I've always was ready for kind of anything, and that's what working in wrestling has allowed me to be. So
after your episode of Friends airs, and you sort of segue back into professional wrestling. So you mentioned that you didn't really fit in with the new people on the in the writers staff. So when did you start transitioning out and saying, what, I just want to go back to wrestling?
So it's interesting. So I worked for Vic Levin. The show was called Ladies Man with Alfred Molina, who some people probably remember from Chocolat and various other stuff. And I had on that weird sitcom called Ladies Man, 3 people that worked on that show ended up working on the WWE creative team. Very weird. Like, it was very oddly weird. One was this guy, Andy Gregg, who we called Andy the Giant. He left. He was my writer's assistant. I had moved up to script coordinator on that show. And like, basically I was in charge of everything as far as the function of the room. So like, Vic had hired me to basically run everything beyond what he was running. So I was in charge of making sure the writers had their paperwork done for the guild and all this stuff, and make sure they knew their assignments and blah, blah, blah. But my writer's assistant was this kid, Andy Gregg. And he had been college friends with Brian Gewirtz, who was the head writer of Raw. And so Brian had basically hired him. He got the dream job I wanted before me. And I still talk to Andy to this day. He works at the NFL Network now, working on the pre-NFL show that airs before the major games on the NFL Network every week now. And so he went to work on the thing, and I remember him coming back to the room when they were in LA and telling me about what it was like, and I'm like, yes, I still want that job. And then ultimately this other guy named Eric Shapiro joined the WWE writers team much later after I had left, and I was still Facebook friends, and it was just very odd that this one little show that never did anything ended up staffing 3 people to the WWE over the next 15 years. But so I worked on a bunch of different shows. I worked on Ladies Man. I worked on a couple pilots. I worked on a show called The Downer Channel, which aired 2 episodes and actually aired head to head with Ladies Man in the summer in a burn-off scenario in the summer, I think, of 2001. Yeah, it was the summer of 2001. And then I worked on a show called Bob Patterson, which was Jason Alexander's first sitcom after Seinfeld. And, that show actually had a lot of drama as far as the showrunner at the time had left after the pilot. So they hired these other 2 showrunners. And it's just interesting. Every show was run differently that I worked for. And at the time, that show didn't do very well. And our debut date was actually September 13th, 2001. Wow. So, yeah. So let's just say the show, it didn't obviously, if you remember, there was no television for at least a week. Everything was sort of pushed aside, and America was not looking for a self-help show with the guy from Seinfeld. So, it was a fine show. It lasted 4 months. And, I had, over the time period, had been always sending my resume into WWE because they always were posting. It seems like they're always been posting for writers. And I would send my resume every time, literally every time. And the day that we got canceled with Bob Patterson, which was also a very fun day that I met Biff from Back to the Future. He was actually a guest star. So, and we never finished the episode, but I got to meet Biff, which, for TV or film nerds was always really cool. I got home and I went to my house in Sherman Oaks, and literally that day was in the mailbox was a letter from WWE asking me to write a sample to be considered for the writing team. And so weird karma, and I'm a heavy believer of all that, and that was how it happened. And I spent basically a week writing a sample. It was November of 2001. I wrote a sample. I think one was with Edge and Christian, and one was with RVD and Kurt Angle. I think I'd look on it like a hard drive somewhere, but again, this was 15 years ago. I wrote samples. I sent it off, and didn't hear anything for a while. And sometime in January of that year, I got a call from a woman named Jen Unick. Yes, that was her real last name, Unick. And she was Stephanie McMahon's assistant and had said that, that I was to have a phone call with Stephanie on 1:00 in the middle of the workday one day. I remember was working on a Christopher Lowell interior design show, which I had gotten a script coordinator job on. And, I did an interview, and she said, "Great, can you come to Stamford?" I was like, "When?" She's like, "This week." Or the next week. I was like, okay. So I took a flight on a Monday. It was actually if people are wrestling fans, it was when Triple H and Stephanie got married the last time on TV, and he left her at the altar and she did that really famous roar. It was that week. I flew to Stamford on a Monday or Tuesday. I interviewed on a Wednesday. I interviewed again with the team on a Thursday. I was hired on Valentine's Day, 2002. And she said, "When can you start?" I said, "When do you need me?" She goes, "Can you be in Milwaukee on Sunday?" This was Thursday. I flew from Stamford, Connecticut to back to LA, packed up my life on a Friday, left on a Saturday, and I've been in pro wrestling 16 years ever since.
Dave, let me just ask you really quickly. Were you married at this time by any chance?
No.
Okay. I was going to say, I wanted to ask, I could imagine saying, if you were married at that time, just saying, "Hey, Stephanie McMahon needs me to fly to Milwaukee. So I'll see you later,"
Yeah. Well, and I was 20 at the time. I was 26. So, it was the dream. And I get a lot of emails every week saying, "Oh, it's my dream job to work for WWE." And I really sympathize with it. And the world is so different now compared to, I'm sure my parents would probably go, "What the hell are you talking about?" I don't think I would have went to college now because there's so many options to be creating content. I would have been making I was making films and videos when I was 12, 13 years old with my VHS camcorder or whatever, my High 8 or whatever the hell I had at the time. And I was editing. I burnt out so many VCRs in making wrestling videos. I made I don't know if if you've seen the Paul Heyman, This Is Paul Heyman DVD. There's a scene where Paul talks. It's from ECW in 1995, and it's him and Taz and Tommy Dreamer at a fan convention. I'm literally sitting one row away from them shooting a video, which was one of the very early shoot tapes. Like before there were shoot tapes, it was like Jim Cornette's Smoky Mountain Wrestling tapes that I used to trade with Dave Prazak, who runs Shimmer, and I had one of the very first things. So the summer of 1995, I made somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 and 150 VHS tapes that I sold to people on Rec Sport Pro Wrestling and AOL Grandstand. That ended up becoming I probably made somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 selling the shoot tape in 1995. So but there was no YouTube. So this was how you made money, and this is how you traded tapes. So anyway, I wasn't married, so I kind of just went wherever and sort of took the opportunity. And WWE was great at that time as far as they put me in a hotel. I had a 3-week trial. I was in Milwaukee. That was when the NWO returned. That was my first day. I worked Milwaukee, Chicago, and then Rockford. And then I flew back to Stamford. I stayed in a hotel for a couple of weeks. We did TV in Boston and Providence, Rhode Island, and then a couple other places. And they liked me, and they said, "Can you stay for 3 months?" I said, "Yes." So I did 3 months. They put me in housing, and I stayed 6 years.
You mentioned college, by the way, Dave. I couldn't agree with you more. Like, if I'm 32, by the way, and I went to college, and I still wonder. Every time I pay my student loan every month, I'm just like, what the hell am I paying this for? Like, I can't. I still don't understand what I'm paying for because I sure as hell didn't learn anything in college.
Yep.
I actually, here's a fun little story for you. I actually, as soon as I graduated, they offered me a job at my college I graduated from.
Yeah.
And then they turned around and I started teaching video editing courses because none of the professors that in the communications department knew how to use the video equipment. Not one bit of it. Not the cameras, not the editing software, nothing. And I'm sitting here going, here I am, a fresh college graduate, and I'm basically teaching the courses for them.
Yeah.
It was, you hear the word racket used a lot, but I mean, come on, you know what I mean? Like, at some point, you're like, what was it all worth?
Exactly. And I really appreciated my Emerson College education because, I got to do I did a lot of production. And, I mentioned Terry Metalis, who created 12 Monkeys. Our junior year, we were like, how many, like, he had done a couple episodes of the sitcom called The Late Hour the year before. It was sort of, what was that? Larry Sanders. It was Larry Sanders, but, a little different. And so he'd done like 2 or 3 the year before. And I was like, well, I can direct. I couldn't. I actually just faked it. And I remember I said, let me direct 1 episode. And I remember we were in the control room and he was watching. He goes, my God, that was like Cheers. And I was like, yeah, I just watched Cheers and figured out how to do it. I didn't learn how to direct. I didn't learn how to direct in class. I learned by watching sitcoms and figuring out, oh, okay, so they cross shoot, so okay, great, I will just literally do what they did. And I self-taught myself a lot of stuff, especially a lot of techniques like that, because it's all there for you if you want to learn it. You know what I mean? You just have to do the work. So so like a lot of that stuff I learned, and that's college. I didn't learn in college. I learned basically by doing. So we used to go do sitcoms. We would do what we call production weekends, and these college kids and these actors, because they wanted to have content. And again, there was nowhere to put it. There was no YouTube. I don't know what the hell we thought we were doing, but we made 10 episodes of a sitcom. I don't even think we spent any money, and it was all very good. We won these college awards, and for me to be able to say here 18 years later that he's gone on to create a sci-fi TV show and worked in television for a long period of time, and I've done what I've done. It shows if you're willing to work hard, it doesn't matter what the environment is, you can succeed.
Yeah, and it's also too when you have the internet the way it is. If you wanted to learn anything, I always tell people, if you have, because if they have kids or they're thinking about going back to college, I say go on to YouTube or anything else like Udemy. For $10 on Udemy, you could learn a whole course, or for YouTube for free, and you can actually see if you like this rather than dropping like $50,000 trying to get a master's degree or whatever, and then you graduate and you're like, well, I really don't like this anymore.
Yeah, and YouTube, God, I wish YouTube existed back then. And I was actually on the internet probably way earlier than I should. I was on a service called Prodigy, which I think you're probably too young to remember, but Prodigy was one of the very early first services that had wrestling on it. Bob Ryder, who I worked with at TNA, I met Bob Ryder in 1990 or 91. He ran the wrestling section of Prodigy, and on there at the time was Jeremy Borash, Dutch Mantell. I met Dutch Mantell in 1991, and I ended up working with Dutch in 2011, 20 years later. Who else was on there? Justin Roberts, Lou D'Angeli, who was Sign Guy Lou, the Dudleys, Dave Shearer was on there. All these people that here nearly 30 years later I still know in the wrestling business were on this little thing. And then everybody moved to Rec Sport Pro Wrestling, which was pre-Twitter, how you got it. And then obviously some websites, which, Joey Styles and Shearer and Mike Johnson started with Bob. And, it's strange how things have kind of evolved. But, it evolves so fast when you look back at it. And, you can learn so much if you just take the time to kind of get into it.
So basically, Dave, if you were starting out today, what would you do a little differently if you were going to start this, like go around the same career path of going to Hollywood and starting a writing career?
I probably, I have right now, like sitting in front of me, I have a Panasonic GH4 Luminex camera, which I made the Galloway documentary on, and I did all the Billy Corgan documentaries I did this year. I probably would have talked my parents into buying me this camera, and I would have been making films. And with YouTube, I mean, again, I don't know if how much of a YouTuber you are, and I'm pretty much a novice as far as how much I do. But the ability to make something and get people to watch it and share it instantly is everything. You know what I mean? Like in 1999 or 98, when I moved to LA, I had to write a script. If you wanted to be on a writing team, you had to write a spec script of a show. So I used to love that show, Sports Night. Remember that show, Sports Night? So yeah. I wrote a spec of that. And then I wrote a 70s show, and you used to have to send it to people, and they didn't read them. Who's going to read a spec script, which was basically a fantasy episode? It was like fan fiction. You would write showing your skill, and people would judge it, and then you would like, this is how you used to get noticed, and it's insanity. And you used to have to mail it or messenger it. I used to work at a literary agency, so I used to use our messenger service to send my own scripts around to different people, try and get noticed. That's how you used to. Now, like literally, the fact that I'm able to live stream this conversation on a Facebook, writer page to share information that only helps you and I spread content. It's kind of mind blowing. I don't need to be on CBS or a show anymore to spread information, which was just like that to me. That should be so empowering to people. But I feel like people sort of are lazy and they instead just want to have their opinion and like they want to live on their opinion instead of the things they create. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like you sort of mean like they want to use social media, like let's say Twitter, to sort of just tweet out like an opinion rather than create something like on YouTube. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Just as far as any kind of content creation that they want to make, and if you have something like a narrative to push, great, tell a story. And being that I'm 42 years old, sometimes I still feel like the kid who was making movies, to get out of writing papers in high school. I used to seriously make videos to get out of writing papers, and I used to get an A because the teacher used to be so happy they didn't have to grade another paper. They would give me an A just because it was literally a video and they just could watch it and that was it. So sometimes I feel I'm exactly the same person. I think I'd be making stuff.
You have to be that way, Dave.
What's that?
I was going to say you have to be that way. You have to keep that that imagination alive and that feeling alive, because you know what, you don't want to be one of those people that you meet and they're just like burned out completely. They're just like they're so apathetic. They're so constantly snarky. Like, oh yeah, that's real cool. It's kind of like that episode of The Simpsons, by the way, which by the way ties into Billy Corgan, by the way, where Homer was getting shot in the gut with a cannonball, and those two Generation Xers, one was like, oh, the cannonball guy, he's real cool, and the other one's like, are you being sarcastic? And the other guy says back, I don't even know anymore.
Yeah. Was that the episode Billy was in?
Yeah, I think he was in. I think he was backstage.
Yeah, it's so weird. But yeah, I mean, like, people just they live and die on their opinion, which is great. But eventually, you gotta get on the field, and if you want to, if you're happy, and some people are very content in their lives, and I don't mean to be sarcastic about that at all, because we all have the ability to do whatever we want. Some people like working in an office, and by the way, hustling is hard. I quit TNA in November of last year, and I had to hustle to, it was a pretty severe pay cut, meaning that I went from making a pretty good living to making no living. So I had to replace the income, but it was the right thing for me at the time. So, it's up to you to hustle.
So we mentioned to Billy, and we're talking about you quit TNA. So now you're working with NWA Wrestling, correct? And
Yes.
Billy is the head of that. So I don't know how many details you can talk about, Dave, but as we find you now, you've gone through. You went from Hollywood, you went into wrestling. You've been in wrestling for what, 14 years, give or take.
16, but who's counting?
So 16 years, and now you're with NWA. Like Dave, I read the article that Billy had that it was about Billy and what they're going to do with TNA. I'm sorry, with NWA. I am actually one of those people that Billy mentioned in the article. I used to be a huge wrestling fan, and I would watch Monday Night Raw and Nitro back and forth, flipping back and forth. I would watch it like a religion. And after 2001, 2002, actually, you know what? Right around the time I graduated high school, that's when I stopped. I just quit cold turkey. I have a bunch of friends who are huge movie fans, right? They have libraries and stuff. Well, one of them just got into wrestling, like hardcore. And I just go, he wanted to like bring me over and show me some of the things. And I go, I just can't get into it anymore. I just for a lot of different reasons. But that's what I think you guys are trying to do with NWA is not only because it's a name brand from, way back in the 50s, I think is when it started. It's the fact that you're trying to get those fans that are just jaded from, the current products available.
Well, and it's interesting because research will show, like they used to give us research when I worked at WWE that, of the 3 million, 4 million that would watch Raw on a Monday night, that's an average. It's probably about 4.3 million people watch Raw, but they cycle through on an evening. So people are always sort of checking it out. And I think the key is you have to understand that you have to compel somebody to want to watch. Like when a sports team is terrible, like when a team is terrible, the attendance is usually terrible. Why? Because it's not good. Nobody wants to go and sit and watch something that's not going to entertain them. And I'm not saying that WWE isn't entertaining. I understand that it's fine for people, but the energy and how often do you probably check it out once a year, right? You probably sit down and watch a segment or two or a whole show, and you go, it's not for me. Yeah. One, your tastes have changed. You have a little bit of romanticism for what 1999, 98, 2000 is or was, and your content viewing has changed. And I use this example of in 1999, if your mother wanted to share an article in the newspaper, how would she do it? She would call her friend, right?
Oh yeah.
She would call her friend, and she would seriously think of. So I want to use this analogy. Now, your mother can go on Facebook Live and rant and rave about an article, or share it, or she could post a selfie. And I'm not going to judge your mother if she's posting selfies. And it's the joke of, Instagram used to be for kids posting selfies, and now it's for late 40s, early 50s women's to be posting selfies. So if you use that as a primer, that means from 1999 till now, everyone got in the content game. So everybody's ability to digest content has changed heavily, meaning that everybody's now the amount of content you take in, it's not just, oh, okay, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, I'm going to watch Raw, or I'm going to watch The Shield on FX. Now, all day, we're doing this with our thumb, which you can't see, but people on the little live stream can see, is you're scrolling, and that's how content goes. But Hollywood has never caught up to that. They still create content the same way. And wrestling's the same way. And this is where this whole thing sounds very ethereal, because we haven't executed it yet. But at the scale of Billy and I and what we have with the NWA, it's just us. I don't have to retrain a staff of 100 people, who have been in media. I can go find me at 20 years old if I want to be in wrestling and give them this camera. Again, I'm pointing like you can see it, and say, great, this is what I want, and let them go do that. So that's what I mean is this. There's a complete reset button in the content business. And it's really kind of fascinating, this adventure. And this is where, again, to the point of a guy commenting on Twitter or putting your money where your mouth is, Billy is committing significant money to chase a thing that he loves in wrestling. He'll make more money on music than he will in wrestling, but he loves it and he wants to do it. And I love it. I could go do something else and probably be pretty darn successful doing it. But, you know, we both are this weird attraction to pro wrestling. And, you know, I've worked a couple more places than he has, and he obviously has a lot more business and media experience than I do. It's a nice connection, and we're both very honest with each other, and we have a very simple philosophy when it comes to the NWA, and it's protect the Shield. And I tweeted it earlier. And, you know, for years, people have abused the letters, the logo, and used it for their own selfish behavior. My job is to protect that Shield, and every business, creative, and HR decision is to make sure that this brand grows, and we go from there. And I will argue with anybody that tries to tell me that what they're doing is good for the Shield, because 9 times out of 10, it's good for them way before it's good for the Shield.
Yeah, right. You know, they're just using it to promote their own self-interest, right? So,
which is what, but I understand that that's part of the business. Mm-hmm. But for years, if you, I don't know if you've ever went to it. I went to NWA shows in 1986, and I went to some in 2016, 2017. It's not the same. It's like walking into a McDonald's and all they serve is fried chicken.
I actually have been to one NWA show.
When was it?
It was in, I want to say 2002 or 1. It was at the Cherry Hill Hilton in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Okay. I remember Dan Severn wrestled Lord Steven Regal.
Okay. That was probably pretty good. And I'm not saying that the NWA has been terrible from 1986. You know, my friend Dave Marquez had the NWA rolling from 2007 until, like, they used to do arena shows with Adam Pearce and Blue Demon and a bunch of guys that are all now Finn Balor used to be on NWA shows. People don't know that. Like they used to draw 6,000 people because they figured out sort of a formula that worked in whatever year that was. It was like 2007, 2008, that they were drawing 6,000 people. You know, and so I'm not saying the thing has been dead since Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair. It just takes commitment and time and building.
So with you and Billy taking over NWA, is there like a launch date that's coming up for when you're going to start, you know, creating some shows, some content on maybe even a YouTube channel? Is there like a firm date yet?
We've already started, and like this is the funny thing is you know that article came out, and one of the important pieces in it was the Dave Marquez section. You know, we're the two things are important: getting the logo right, meaning as far as everything we do is off of the idea of what we see the logo, and that world championship. You know, the belt, when you said Dan Severn, that to me was what that title, the domed globe, that is the most important part of the history of the business, because that title, you know, and it became sort of fake legacy in wrestling after, you know, it wasn't the NWA, but it dates back all the way to 1948. The company turns 70, 80? I'm really bad at math. Wait, 48 to 2018. Is that 70 years or 80 years? Somebody will.
I think that I think it might be 70 years. I'm gonna be bad at math too. We're both named Dave and both bad at math.
It's fine. You know, basically the title dates back to 1948. You know, Lou Thez wasn't the first champion, and I just looked at it. People will get on me, but you know, Lou Thez in the late 40s, early 50s, you know, to Dory Funk, to Buddy Rogers, to Jack Briscoe, to Flair. I mean, like Harley Race, like all these names that are legendary things, and every major title, every major title has spurned off of it. The AWA World Champion spurned off of the NWA World title because Vern Gagne never got the NWA title, so he created his own. The WWF, I think in 1964, that's when Buddy Rogers, who I think was the NWA champion or had been it, split away, and that's how the WWF title started in, I think, 1964. ECW, TNA, all these companies have their world championships started with the legacy of this thing. Adam Pearce calls it the godfather of pro wrestling championships. So for us, we started shooting content a week or two ago in Los Angeles where Tim Storm, a man who a lot of people have no idea who he is, and he'll even say that. And so the journey starts this Saturday on select CW stations on a show called Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And that content will be spread out across YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. And the narrative starts. And we have no expectation of what and how this story, because I don't have mouths to feed. I don't have a 2-hour TV show on a Wednesday that I have to get to a network. All I have is to protect the Shield and the title. And every decision, again, is based off of that. And that's where I think we can win, because we can scale based upon that.
You know, Dave, I have a feeling that the first company, which will probably be you, to actually, you know, take Facebook Live, maybe even Periscope, YouTube broadcast, if they're the first ones to sort of use that for pro wrestling, because I think at some point WWE, I mean, I haven't watched it in years, but I know that they launched the network again, because I have friends who, you know, obviously who still watch it. But if they go beyond the network and at some point in time they ever start to actually broadcast it live on Facebook, I think that's where they're going to have to go. But if somebody can beat them there, like you, I think that's very important, because obviously they have billions of dollars, and it's important to be, you know, first to be the first person to plant your flag into that.
Well, and you know, I think you almost said the word monetization. I think that was probably the next word out of your mouth, and it's one that I've, you know, in every interview I've done is one of the first things. Well, how do you monetize this? And in a brand build, and especially a brand like this that has all this legacy, but also is basically, we have a house that's kind of ripped out to the studs, and we need as much attention as possible. We need as much eyeballs as possible. So, and in the article, Billy talked about, I'd rather have 300,000 people watching for free than 4,000 people behind a paywall. And he was generous with the 4,000, because I have intimate knowledge of the paywall business, and short of WWE and New Japan, nobody is doing 4,000 people behind a paywall. So once you kind of get the math of that going, is it worth it? Is it worth limiting all this character building, all this content for 4,000 people? And I understand something's got to pay for it, but this is where Billy goes, I'm going to use my money and we're going to be smart. So any content that I create, I have to present Billy with a budget. It's going to cost us this. And he'll give me a thumbs up or he'll give me a thumbs down. And that's the point. But if you're spending $100,000 for a Facebook Live show, well, that's where you go, oh, crap, how do I do that? So it's, again, making right business decisions and making content. And that's finding ways to do it. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to go live tomorrow and book 20 wrestlers to do a 3-hour show. I'd rather build up to something that you pay for.
Yeah, and again, you know, that I was going to say monetization, but again, you know, we're talking about, you know, creating that content and, you know, finding out where those eyeballs are in the changing landscape, and you know, and making sure that you plant your flag there. You know, Dave, I know we're almost out of time. I just want to say, just to sort of wrap this up, you know, is there anything we get a chance to talk about that you wanted to just to say right now, or anything you want to
keep going, please? You know, if you have more questions or whatever, I obviously have time. So just. The important part that I think that really, you know, and I'd be curious what other questions you have as far as content, or like tell me sort of like, what are your struggles with the content you create? Where is the audience for you, and where isn't it?
Well, to be honest with you, I've learned to be more of a YouTube guy. And
right.
I think YouTube, especially if you can find a niche, is really the social media platform I should have been on years ago. Yep. And I really, I guess out of sheer stupidity, I don't know, I dug my heels in. So I actually have a TV pilot that actually just got completed today. Literally, I just got the finishing pieces today, and I'm going to be putting that up on YouTube. It's a TV pilot I did a few years ago. And it's about 5 employees working at a video game store. And I actually showed it around to some people, and they said, Dave, if, you know, we ran a TV station, this would be, you know, on there. Just to give you the concise of it, I actually pitched it to G4. G4 loved it, but right before they closed, it became the GQ channel. It's going to be going up on YouTube later this week for free, absolutely free. And I just want to get that out there so that way, one, because I'm tired of sitting on it and looking at it, and two, I want to be able to say, hey, look, this is some of the stuff that I've done in the past. Maybe get a little money and get a little audience so I can actually start doing more stuff and not work a soul crushing IT job all day.
That's a horrible indication or indoctrination of your daily job. But hey, trust me, there's a word that is escaping me. I apologize. But here's the interesting thing, because I danced that game before. Like one of my early, before I got into directing, one of my best friends is a man by the name of Mike Dotto, and he used to joke about this thing called Dotto Vision. I literally just wrote this on his Facebook page right before we started. And Dotto Vision was you take an HD TV and you turn it on its side. 16 by 9. He invented Snapchat and fucking Instagram before anybody even thought of it. And I just said, you like, take the chance. Like if he would have started producing movies in what we used to call Dotto Vision, think about now when you watch content, how much of it is 9 by 16?
Yeah, seriously, right?
A lot.
Yeah.
Because it's native to the platform. I am shooting my live stream right now in 9 by 16 because it's the only way my iPad can sit without needing a bracket. And it's interesting that you just have to adapt to the market. Like if I were you, great, you have this pilot. I would then take that same idea, I would write more scripts, and I would produce it as a podcast. Why do you need one? I'm sure, I don't know what you paid for it, but what is one of the more hardest parts of producing something is getting people in a room and shooting it. It's hard to put something in front of a camera. So, but if you build an idea that's good, why is there not serialized audio content like old school radio shows? I love podcasts. I love talking to people, but the format to me, every podcast is exactly the same. It's two people having a conversation, and like that's an idea. I've always kicked around the idea of recording, like, I don't even know what the number would be, but a whole season of scripted shows in audio format and releasing one a day, like found footage, like audio tapes that have been found from the 70s or 80s. That's an idea. You can do it. And it does. What does that cost you? Just a couple people in front of a microphone. Mm-hmm. And but that's how much time do people listen to podcasts? And it's you can create content at any time. I don't know if you've messed around with Anchor at all. I've played with it a little bit. Instagram stories. You can put content out in so many different ways. And that's why self-branding is so important. And as highly entertaining and interesting I am, I play with things simply so I can teach other people that are far more talented or engaging in front of a camera than I am to use these mediums. And look at the people who are successful on Instagram. There's not a lot of talent there. They're pretty, they do sort of one thing really well. But if Steven Spielberg came along today, I don't think he's making movies. I really don't. I think because it's really hard. What you just told me as far as your pilot, you're worried no one will ever see it. You're going to put it up for free because somebody's got to see it, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But how do you continue that story? Well, you can't afford to make more of them, I'm sure, right?
Well, it's a location issue more than anything. Like that is the key of it.
So how do you continue the story without the location? Why wouldn't you continue as an audio podcast?
Well, there's been a lot of ideas like I used to pass around of how to actually continue it. At this point, I'd actually wait until I did write other scripts. Like I have everything all compiled. I actually had some really, really cool people interested in, and also giving me advice a lot of the time who are actually out there making actual TV right now. And so that's why when it's done, I'm going to show it to them. But I know what you mean. Like if Spielberg came around today, I actually used to, and this is something that I've said before, there is no more known directors because the last directors that you probably know of before you even see their movies, Kevin Smith, Quentin Tarantino, Spike Lee, all those guys came up in the same time, Robert Rodriguez. those guys, but now if you go, those guys came around the early 90s. You flash forward to today, and I'm going to give you from 2000 to 2017. You don't know, there's no more celebrity directors. Like, you cannot even name one of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's well, that's like, you know, and the guys that I came out of college with were sort of I was the last group of kids to not learn how to edit on a computer. You know how hard it was to teach myself nonlinear editing after I learned on tape? And a lot of the film guys that the guys that I was in college with used to cut film, like legitimately, used to cut and paste it together. Like things change quickly and you have to be adaptable. That's why, like, creating content every day, like I don't know how much you've looked at Logan Paul. Yeah. The dude's 22 years old and his YouTube videos generate $11,000 a day in pre-roll ad money.
Yeah, I actually, because as I was getting into YouTube, I have a lot of friends. I actually have a friend of mine. He actually has one of the top YouTube channels out there. It's in the top 1%. And he's always, talking about different things. And we always go back and forth about different things. See, I often wonder too, like guys like that, I think that they're made for that short form medium of like, hey, look at my life. I'm so freaking cool. And that's what a lot of those YouTubers use social media for is and the Instagram people. It's almost like, look at my life, look at how cool and crazy I am. I think with this Spielberg, I do want to go back and make movies. I could never just be happy just making like a short YouTube show unless it was something like I had a couple friends of mine, they made a YouTube show. It was a web series, but it had a lot more to it than just sort of like PewDiePie does, or even Logan Paul does.
Well, story is super important. You know what I mean? Like, and the reason Logan and his brother have been successful, and I use success in a air quotes kind of way, is they figured out a way to speak to an audience that will come watch them every week or every day. They make daily videos. So like they found a story that works for them, and they build a narrative and all that stuff. And on my live stream, I have a very good friend, Linda Strawberry, who directed Billy's music video that he just put up, and it's excellent. It's visionary. She couldn't do that every day. You can't make that content every day. So you have to figure out sort of a way that you can be consistent, but you don't need a film company to put out film anymore. You can literally make it and put it out. And you can be putting content on every day, and you can tell a story every day. These interviews are all kind of the same that I'm doing. They're all sort of the same theme. And, Billy's listened to a couple of them, and he's given me some points of what thing is. But I don't have a script in front of me. I just know the narrative of the story, of what I can do every day. And we can do it. Like, I know exactly the vein of the idea we want to do because nobody's doing it. I dare you to go look at a wrestler's social media and see if he's telling a story. One, because WWE doesn't let them. They're handed a script, which is fine. That's how WWE makes their movies, which is fine. Every other company, you're super independent, and But the thing is look at. I don't know if you've paid attention to what the Young Bucks have done. They have a weekly YouTube show, which is scripted, and they've gone ahead. And I have to look at their numbers in the last 3 weeks, but they keep doing these big moments that draw more eyeballs on it, and all they're doing is building an audience. But they're also not capitalizing on certain YouTube things that allow them to grow their audience, which is cross-promotion, using other YouTubers. Like when Billy and I were on the road, we ran into this guy called the Daily Woo, and I had never heard of him. He was friends with Kenny Johnson, who is a YouTuber and a wrestling videographer that I know. And by having him on our show, we added an extra 7,000 views on that one video, because he was on it, and we were on his, and the cross promotion helped. So it's what's interesting is understanding and how to tell stories in this native environment that helps grow your channels. You and I have talked before, but I've never been on your show before. And if I can pick up 1, 2, 5, one new person that follows me or talks to me off of this podcast, to me it's a win, because it's literally one person at a time. And I'm not asking you for money. I'm not asking them for money. And think about now in wrestling or a lot of content, a lot of stuff exists behind a paywall. And hopefully I'm giving good information or entertaining. And what you didn't see that the Facebook saw, my cat joined us for a good 5 minutes, and she sat there and then she got bored and left. So, that's the audience. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, and also because with so many content options now, whether it be free or paid, that's why I think it's so important with relationships. I didn't just keep hounding you. Okay, maybe I did a little bit, but I was just like, hey, Dave, I'm a good guy. I try to be different than see, because you mentioned you were on other podcasts. I always try to be so different than other podcasts by asking different questions. And I've had and I don't want to mean to blow my own horn here, but other people have come up and said, hey, you know what, you seem like you're in another conversation and you didn't just ask me, jackassy questions like, so tell me, what is Vince McMahon really like? Well, I mean, like, does anybody even really matter anymore? Does that question even really matter anymore?
It does to some people, and you know your audience. But here's the thing: when you put it up, you get a certain amount of feedback, and that's what I'm saying is you have to understand the content you put up. And I hold back, and I haven't done a lot. I've done 3 to 5 interviews since I left TNA, and before that, I did none for 5 years. They didn't want me to, and because I have an opinion, and it's I do. I'm not gonna sugarcoat stuff. And literally, my first day at the company, I sent a tweet out, "Calm before the storm," and I showed a picture of the sky. And I remember the owner of the company, Dixie Carter, going, "Well, why did you tweet that?" I said, "Because it's what I thought and felt, and I thought it was good." Well, people are going to think stuff. Well, isn't that my job? You know what I mean? Well, we're still dealing with the situation, and we can't have people know that you're here. Well, I am here. I work here now. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like to me, I believe in being transparent. So, that's what I mean is as long as you understand your audience and what you're speaking to and being okay with not overthinking your content, and you've got a strong, we've not talked a lot of wrestling, and I'm perfectly fine with that. You know what I mean? Like, and that's why I've split this conversation across my Twitter and my Facebook page. And, some people have stayed for the whole thing. Some haven't. Some might watch it later. But again, I don't mind sharing it because to me it's important. If you're doing a great piece of content, great. And I hope that people will check it out. And if they don't, then they can listen to the 36th podcast that somebody does talking about the end of Raw. You know what I mean? Like to me, that's where I don't waste my time. As far as if I watch a show, if I'm into it, I will follow a couple experts and you get some insight. But these people go down this rabbit hole of like how many hours can you digest about the same thing? And I understand Game of Thrones and Walking Dead, people have their desires to know everything, but I don't know. Yeah, I'd rather create an interesting narrative that pushes everything forward. So.
Well, that's what I mean, because when going back to my question about Vince McMahon, it's just like, how many times can you be asked the same question? And going to what you just said, I have a friend of mine who he told me one time how many podcasts he listens to, and amongst the Raw and SmackDown and whatever. And I said to him, my God, man, how many hours a week do you devote to professional wrestling? And a lot of it is, Dave, is hitting the same nail with the same hammer. How many times can you, I just don't get it. Maybe he just likes to have things completely reinforced. I don't know. But I mean,
I get it.
Yeah.
That's to me, that's where we looked at the sweet spot. And so everyone's like, well, are you guys going to have a 2-hour television show? You need television to pay for this. Well, yes, we do. But you've paid attention to a lot of YouTubers. And you've paid attention to a lot of people that are creating businesses. I mean, there are girls that have Instagram pages that literally they just show their butt. It's not me. No one's going to scroll to see my butt. Not you even, Linda. But as far as but they make money, product placement and all this stuff. And that that's the interesting part is I have friends who are fitness models and they get paid by companies to hold things, and they get paid to do it. Why can't that be part of the wrestling content model? And it's interesting to create content around that, but not be so salesy. So I don't even have anything. So I have a Seagate drive. So if we're sitting here doing this podcast and I'm talking about blah, blah, blah. I really enjoy Seagates. If it fits naturally or it's part of the content, then yes, this is sponsored by Seagate, but this isn't. But this was an example. To me, integration of product into content is important. It can drive these things, and you don't need to have a network to do that. Because I think products, I think Philips or Seagate or Nike or even WWE soon will, to get their talents exposed on other people's thing, will either provide the talent for free for exposure or sponsor it. It'll be and you've seen it like on WWE. It's like Taco Bell presents Cesaro versus Sheamus. Like that happens, and there's a money exchange, or it's part of a trade, and that's the business now. I'm sure if you have sponsors for your podcast, but they want to find an audience that is exactly like you and I could sell video equipment because it's a content podcast. You're not going to sell a lot of Depends. You know what I mean? Like maybe you would. I don't know what your audience is, but I would use it because we've been sitting here for how long is this? An hour and a half?
About an hour, yeah.
So and I'm not going to grab the laptop and go in the bathroom this time, but it's that's what I mean. That's how niche you can get, and that's why I love like these live streams or YouTube, because it literally tells you your audience is 14 to 16-year-old boys in Sheboygan who like M&Ms. So that's what I mean. Is it's really interesting the data you get, and television doesn't give it to you. And it's scale, and what Billy wants to invest and what we're going to put into it. We're going to work with smart people that want to work hard and build something and know the payouts coming at the end, instead of having their hand out day one going, hey, brother, what am I getting paid today for this, brother? And if they want to work that way, that's fine. There's plenty of places that'll pay them once for it, but they'll end up, they're independent contractors, and they'll be paid once, and then they haven't brought any real value, and they haven't built their brand. And to me, that's why I don't mind spending time talking to you, because, again, if one person, two people, five people enjoy it and will come back for the next thing, eventually when I sell something, anything, they'll be more in tune because I've given them some value.
Also because also in content too, I've noticed long tail. Long tail is where it's at. You can't think like a movie anymore, where it's like the first 3 days. I always tell people just sort of brush that off and think more of how is this going to pay off in a week, in a month, in 6 months, in a year? Because this audio, this podcast I'm going to put up, it's going to be up there. The YouTube channel, it's going to be up there for a year. Some people are, looking at something else. The SEO comes back, the keywords come back, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, that Dave Lagana, he did a podcast a year ago with some guy we never heard of. But hey, you know what? We're gonna watch it, by God, and we're gonna tune in.
Well, there's like there are pieces of software for YouTube that helps you with your tagging. Mm-hmm. I'll message you after. I use it, and it's how I got the Galloway documentary from. I pushed it hard to a bunch of different people. Like, hey, if you like it, share it, but never asked. But like, a bunch of people shared it, and I did 11,000 views in the first 3 days. Again, for a unsubscribed YouTube channel, it was fine. I used this piece of software that told me sort of how YouTube searches would rank against the search terms of what was there, and sort of how to optimize a YouTube video. Overnight, when Drew, I timed it when Drew won the NXT World Title, or the whatever title it's called. I changed the tags to what people would search for. It did 17,000 views overnight because they were searching for him, and it was the right piece of content to release at the right time. So now you make content. Like, I would suggest you put this whole thing up, but you may want to. I might say, hey, listen, Dave, send me the piece. I want to chop it up. And I want to put it on my YouTube. I'm going to take 5 sections of it. And Dave Lagana talks about Drew Galloway. Dave Lagana talks about Seagate. And now as people search around the internet and search on the YouTube, and I like saying the YouTube, they will discover my content and your content at the same time. Instead of just putting up a match or a long podcast without the right tagging, you're gonna get more eyeballs and ears on stuff. And by the way, that doesn't exist in television. How do you discover a TV show? That has to be marketed. Now, when you actively search, you go down the rabbit hole. Lance Russell died today, and I went down the rabbit hole. I searched Lance Russell, and I found endless amounts of content. And if you're not in charge of your own search, meaning like if you're not producing content around your name or your subject or your genre, you deserve what happens to you. And meaning that like, you can control that wave of stuff. So And if you do it right, or if you create content that people really want to share or be a part of and engage with them, it's great. And by the way, there's so many different ways. So this Facebook Live has got this many people. My Twitter one had different amounts of people. And so I'm spreading this around across various places. And that means experimenting. But I'm not charging I can't read your name. Oh my God, I'm blind. But I'm not charging anybody that's on this Facebook stream for it. But some people in different businesses would say, well, we should charge them. And jokingly, they used to charge. They would say we should charge them to leave, to get out. So, and that's not how you view an audience. An audience, it's like, our time is important. I want to do this podcast with you, but I wanted to do it when the time was right.
Yeah.
Because like you and I talking 6 months ago, I wouldn't have had the same stuff to talk about. So like, to me, that's important in how you do it. So, and the timing. And so like that's the interesting part. And will it go viral? Probably not. But will the 13 people that are watching on Facebook, or the 32 that watched on Twitter, or how many people listen get value out of it? Yes. And hopefully they'll come back. Hopefully they'll follow. Hopefully they'll ask questions. And I'm happy to talk to anybody. So that's my rant.
Well, and speaking of paying them to leave, it kind of reminds me of New Jersey, where you have to pay $5 or $6 now to go over the bridge.
Well,
I always make that joke about Jersey. You have to pay to leave.
Trust me, I don't know if I told you, I grew up in Jersey. So, yeah. And it's weird that they charge you to leave Jersey. And that's on all the bridges, right? Like every direction. To
get out of Jersey, yeah.
I mean, I guess you should. I mean, for God's sakes, once you get out, you don't want to come back. So, sorry, parents. My parents still live there, so.
It's all in good fun, right, Dave? It's all in good fun. So, Dave, I know we went way over time, but just to sort of surmise everything, I don't want to keep eating up your time, but just in closing, is there anything we didn't get a chance to talk about that you wanted to just say, sort of in closing, or anything you wanted to say, just sort of put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
No, because I'll just talk forever. So, I mean, if we could talk forever, but eventually I'll have to go to the bathroom. So
we have to leave them wanting more, Dave. That's the key. Yeah. We have to leave them wanting more. So, Dave, where can people find you out online?
Sure. On the Twitter box, it's at Lagana, Lagana. Facebook, it's the David Lagana, because I was slow. I don't know if you remember when Facebook gave out customized URLs. I was literally, somebody grabbed Lagana at that point. Instagram is DJ Lagana. I think it's the same on the Snapchat. And that's pretty much it. And then my website, you just Google me. It should be davidlagana.com. And then obviously if you're interested in what we're doing with the NWA, on Twitter it's NWA Wrestling, or just search Billy Corgan NWA and you'll find it eventually. And that's the interesting thing is, the old days of having a website it's not as important as it used to be. You know what I mean? It's all in search. So, people find stuff. You just have to create content that goes around the search. So you can find me. You can harass me. You can send me cats. I have 3 of them. One joined us on the live stream on Facebook. That's it.
And I will link to all that in the show notes at davebullis.com. Again, I just gave out my website. But it was a pleasure talking to you, Dave. And you can
awesome.
I'm going to promote the hell out of this thing. Right. Let's come back. Have you come back on sometime? I mean, we could talk for all sorts about content creation and all this good stuff. And by the way, when my pilot's up, I'm going to send you the link. I want to hear your thoughts.
I would love to watch it. My cat, Abby Tabby, will watch it with me.
Nice. That's 2 views right there.
Well, yeah, she's got her own. Well, no, she actually doesn't have an Instagram. My other cats have an Instagram, which I'm a weird cat person, but they're far more patient than children. I've found. So I like cats. So,
Dave, it's been a pleasure, man, and
awesome.
I wish you the best with TNA, man. But yeah, let's keep in touch, dude.
Great, thank you, David.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.